I think we're live. Hey, Brian, how are you this evening?
Hey, Chuck, how you doing today?
Looking quite festive, and I should say happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I'm kind of in an unfinished room at the moment, so festive and trying really hard to stay warm at this point. So
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up this evening. We're here to talk about your aerobic fitness and how to build your base. It's one of those interesting things because a lot of times folks talk about how base isn't, it's like, oh, they truly kind of half-ass it. And I think that it could possibly be one of the most important times of your training season. So you ready to talk about some aerobic fitness and base?
yeah, let's do it. And I wholeheartedly agree. And it's not the most exciting training you can possibly do, but it is probably it's certainly one of the fundamental bases for everything else we do on the bike the rest of the year as we move through the season. So it does have some importance for sure.
All right, so let's start off with the number one comment that I normally get is what's the difference between, in your mind, the difference between aerobic capacity and fitness?
Well, aerobic capacity is going to be, just what your cardiovascular system is capable of doing, and I think it's two different things. Fitness is going to be a little bit more than that. Fitness is all five pillars of our model, right? This is cardiovascular aerobic fitness is or aerobic capacity is simply one portion of that. I think it's very important to remember that if we can get really cardiovascularly fit and not be able to do much of anything because we're leaving those other components out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because it's one of those interesting things because you've been in the track world for so long, it's not quite as prevalent it is in the road world, but the whole idea of I'm not going to go to the gym because I might get too big, and all those other type of things. And like you said, it's the five elements of fitness, and you've got to hit all five of them to actually be fit. However, tonight we're going to talk about your aerobic base. And when you hear aerobic base, what's kind of the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, it just means that I'm going to be spending cruising, having a happy conversation with one of my cycling buddies while we're out for a couple hour, nice, easy, steady tempo ride for the most part. And it's funny on the track side, of it, and specifically sprinting, to get a sprinter to actually build their aerobic base in the winter, which is every bit as important as it would be for, a full-blown road racer, mountain biker, et cetera. It's like pulling teeth. And it's highly important, right? This is the foundation building blocks of everything else we do, on the far end of the spectrum, as sprinters that we rely on. There's 9 or 10 sprints in a major sprint competition that you're going to have to do, sometimes all in one day. You might want to have that aerobic fitness behind all of that if you want to actually succeed. So it's super critical for everybody, but really tough to get a sprinter to do.
Yeah, one of the things that I tell my athletes is that think about aerobic fitness or aerobic endurance or aerobic capacity, whichever term you want to use, is like, think about it, building a house. And when you have that foundation at the bottom, that is your aerobic base. That's your aerobic fitness. If you don't have that, you cannot build the walls, which eventually becomes your FTP, and you can't build the roof, which eventually becomes your VO2 max. But you've got to have this base. And I think one of the interesting things is that most people don't think of aerobic as being your endurance, your tempo, your threshold, sweet spot, VO2 max. It's all of that. is part of your aerobic side of the house. And then when you read something like 80-20 by Matt Fitzgerald, he talks about that that full zone 2 type of thing. And this is one of the few times I actually talk about heart rate. I think is actually not a bad measure, simply because it kind of keeps you within that. But simultaneously, that zone 2 is not low, long, slow distance either, because I've seen a lot of athletes that think that their zone 2, they finish up an hour and a half ride and they've got an hour and 15 minutes in zone 1, which doesn't
Right.
help build your aerobic base.
Right. Yeah. You need a bit of attention to that. Like kind of breathless. And I would define it as um, breathless conversation plus that's sustainable. One of the things that I like about the heart rate with it is, um, power is going to be dependent on your power output. If you're basing your zones on your power output for something along these lines, you're looking at muscle fatigue from also the gym work you're doing, things along those lines, which are going to skew those results a little bit. The heart rate, obviously, if you're overtrained, you're going to have a problem with that. If you didn't get enough sleep, you're going to have a problem with that. But generally speaking, I think heart rate is a good indicator for that aerobic base.
Yeah, and we're also looking at such a wide spread within that zone 2. So
Sure.
I do kind of, I know we were going to talk about this more towards the end, but I think that it's one of those things that's of interest. You've been in the cycling community since, well, a while.
Shepherd's Pub, yeah.
Since the 80s. I didn't come into to the latter part of the 90s. And you would think that when we talk about threshold and the type and how much technology has assisted and things have changed,
Mhm.
but you don't realize how much base has changed since Eddie Merckx said all you need is more miles.
Mm,
So in
yeah.
your span of a cycling career, what have you seen to change as?
Oh, good grief! I started out with the all you need is more miles, right? If 5 hours a day on the bike was good, then 7 must be significantly better. And it was pretty prevalent back then, and without back in the dark ages, without internet, without the information that's available now at the couple of clicks of a keystroke. It took a while. So I was kind of on the tail end when I started of you just ride and ride and ride and ride and ride and ride and ride. You don't go to the gym, you don't do anything, you just ride. And then it shifted to Eddie B and Ed Burke with the theory that maybe we should get into some periodization. And then it went to riding is a specific thing, so you need to do specific work for riding. And then it became, kind of where we're at now, where we're considering things on a more scientific basis as the information comes in, and all of that stuff. We had digital speedos that told us how fast we were going. Didn't tell us cadence. Certainly didn't tell us power. It didn't tell us a lot. We didn't have a lot of information when I started out, and as that information availability has progressed, now we're up to power meters and wearables and cycling computers that are telling you how many feet you have before you reach the summit of a climb. The detail and the level of information you get, I think, has changed a lot of that in terms of evaluating what is the appropriate way to do that. I know somebody like Pogacar is probably not going out and just smashing 20-25 hours a week on the bike, going through the Alps or the Pyrenees or wherever he's training at to simply ride the bike. I'm sure he's got a bit more science behind what he's doing at this point.
Yeah, I saw a diary entry for Eddie Merckx's, like ride diary, and then one day he was like, go on this long group ride, and then he raced like Tuesday and Wednesday, and then he rode 197 miles by himself on Thursday, and then race Saturday. And the whole idea was just ride more and race often, and that's what's going to make you, the best cyclist. We talked about this a couple weeks ago about, if you can't, and when you set a goal, if you can't measure it, if you can't measure it, then it's probably not a good goal. And with that said, from a coaching perspective, I have kind of my way that I measure whether or not a client is an athlete is has a decent amount of base fitness. What do you look for?
Well, I'm looking at heart rate data, resting heart rate, HRV, and basically, I'm kind of looking at a progression of speed comparatively with that, right? So if you're going out and doing, a 2-hour ride that is consistently, the same ride over and over again, heart rate average is going to either stay the same or actually drop, or you're going to actually speed up on that ride. Those are pretty simple indicators that anybody can do with pretty much a stopwatch and a heart rate monitor to evaluate some of that. And I like to keep it as simple as possible because I think you get into too much complexity and you get lost in the weeds with some of this. But basically, lower heart rate, better sleep, because you're not quite as cooked as you're getting fitter. The speed, the tempo that you do the rides on, all of those things I think are great indicators and really easy to pay attention to. They're not. It's not that part of it shouldn't be that difficult, I don't think.
Right. Yeah. 5 or 6 years ago, we would kind of look at CTL, chronic training load,
Sure.
and say, hey, if somebody's between 50 and 60, then they're probably have a decent base.
Mm-hmm.
However, that's become a whole lot harder to do now that every wearable collects some type of form of TSS and uploads it to Training Peaks. So now you can have somebody who really has no aerobic base, but walks a lot, shovels some snow, and they wear their watch, and their watch said that they just did 37, and what is it, 37 HRTSS or TRTSS or something like that, and it's all captured.
Right.
The one that I like to use a lot, though, is I do like to use power to heart rate ratio or cardiac drift. Just kind of looking at about an hour to hour and a half ride. And if the power to heart ratio stays within 5%, then I know that they have a decent base. But, most of my athletes are roadies. And so, they're used to a 2.5, 3 hour, ride. So it's kind of easier to see the data from.
Well, and it's different too, because all of my riders are track riders, and none of them are riding their power equipped track bikes on the road during the winter. That's where I run into a lot of the problems, being able to look at cardiac drift and compare to power, and because typically I'm trying to think of how many people I actually have that have power on their road bikes to be able to monitor that. So that gets a little trickier on my end in the winter. So I have to look at different metrics to do that. But yeah, I think in most cases, I would assume the vast majority of the people we're talking to, have at least an endurance background, if not, a full-blown road or mountain background, where they're going to spend the time and the money on the power meters for the road. And quite frankly, if you can afford it, putting a power meter on everything you've got, including the unicycle, I think makes sense for what we're trying to do. The more information you can gather, the easier it is to evaluate in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and I do think it's getting a lot easier with the power pedals and that type of stuff to be able to move between bikes and that type of stuff. So you've kind of, to drop back a little bit, you've come from that traditional aerobic base approach, and then kind of the change. What do you think about high intensity interval training done during the winter months. And specifically what I'm thinking about is like, people are now doing Zwift races in December. I mean, 20 years ago, unless you're racing cross, you don't want that intensity. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the problem with racing too early is, it's going to kick that CTL up to a point where you're not going to be. It's not a sustainable thing, and with racing, because of the lack of predictability with racing, there's no way to meter the amount of effort you're putting into it. I think the hit stuff is good simply because it's foundational as well. It keeps balance, it keeps coordination, keeps the central nervous system firing, all of those things. But it should be done at a lower level. Shorter duration, shorter volume stuff. Not necessarily, focusing on that, but it should be. I like to have it as an integral part of the training system in the winter, just to basically keep those systems online, essentially. But you have to be really careful about it, and make sure that your focus is building that base, because this is the time we build the base. This is the time we do all those things that eventually we build walls onto from that point. And that house building analogy is fantastic, right? If you've got a bad base, then nothing else is going to work. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think racing too much too early. I think, and whether I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about it, but whether you like him or not, Lance Armstrong was kind of the first person that decided that, well, I'm going to be very specific about the races I do. I'm not going to do the Giro. I'm not going to do, to do the Tour. I'm not going to throw these things one at a time. I'm going to focus pretty clearly on 2 or 3 events, 3 or 4 events, whatever it is. And, I think that's the model that allows you to get that training specificity and target it. The problem, the other problem with racing is the mental fatigue from it. If you're racing, hard in February and consistently in February, how well are you going to be racing, in July, August, when, most of us really want to be kind of at the top of our game.
Right. All right. So let's just kind of give our, give the folks out there, let's give them some usable stuff. Right.
Okay.
So, if you want to use periodization, that's great. We can say, December through February is a preparation stage, or you can call it base 1, base 2. I don't really care what the name is, but from your perspective, what do you think the priority should be during that? And I'll lead the witness a little bit because I'm looking at it from the perspective of muscular strength, muscular endurance. I'm looking at it body composition wise. I'm looking at it from an aerobic perspective. So what do you think ought to be the focus during that time period?
During this to the end of February time period?
Sure.
Okay. I think definitely building that base, building that aerobic capacity, building general strength in the gym. Basically hypertrophy, getting the muscles developed, going through the process of lifting properly and progressive overload and building that musculature. At that point, working on reducing body fat, changing body composition. Those 3 things I think are probably the key fundamental things that I would be focusing on, for the next couple of months for sure.
Yeah, I tell a lot of my clients that you can actually. So it becomes one of those. It's kind of almost like a paradox of, you can't build muscle in a caloric deficit. However, you can, if you you and I talked about this the other day. From my perspective, if you are above 25% body fat, then your focus should just be getting under 25% body fat. And you can do that while you're doing aerobic capacity, because you can do that work in a caloric deficit with minimal negative effects. But I think it's really important to kind of try to figure out what your goal is during your base period. So we'll just say if you're above 25%, your goal ought to be to get lower, for a couple of reasons. One of which, of course, is watts per kilo. The second is that, from my perspective, the optimal body composition range for muscular development in the gym is somewhere between 16 and 22%. So you want to get into those ranges. So I think that's kind of get your goals and you have your goals set. So if you have a person who's, let's say they're under 20% or under 22%, we'll use that one because most of the athletes we deal with are masters athletes. And they've got about 8 weeks. What do you think they should be doing on kind of a day-to-day basis?
And I think it shifts, so basically it's running two fairly parallel paths between the sprinters and the enduros on the track side of it. Slightly more emphasis on the sprinting side of developing that muscle to actually build, but without neglecting that aerobic work. And it's always a bit of a conflict on the sprint side. No sprinter wants to do aerobic work because they want to get into the gym and hammer the gym. But this is also the only time you have the opportunity. So you're running into a conflicting issue with some of that. You're quite frankly not building as much muscle as you could, working on the aerobic capacity. And because you're in the gym half the time, you're taking away from some of that aerobic capacity development. It's unfortunately a little bit of a compromise that way, but I think that compromise perspective is still critical to achieve what you're trying to do. As you get through into the season, the focus becomes more on speed and explosiveness and developing power, developing strength and then power and then speed throughout that. But the bike kind of travels along with the gym in that capacity. So they tend to merge a little bit more compatibly than they do in the middle of the winter. But both of those components are, certainly on the sprint side are equally valuable for what we're trying to do 6-8 months down the road. On the endurance side, certainly more emphasis on the bike, but again, that strength component becomes critical for them as well. So it's a bit of a juggling match, I think. And I think, individually, you have to look at each person. You have to, as you made the point, if you're over 25% body fat, then, you need to get down below 25% body fat. That should be the priority. But, you have to look at the individual and ask yourself, okay, well, am I trying to do a points race? Am I trying to do a bunch of crits? Am I trying to do a road race? What is my priority? How do I balance that strength component and that aerobic capacity component? And I think you can't completely neglect one for the other, but I think you do have to compromise a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. There's two concepts we've not touched on at all. FTP and VO2 max.
Yeah. Don't care.
I know. They don't have a place right now. It's not their turn.
Not at all. Yeah, we can focus on that down the road. This is not a time that you focus on FTP or VO2 because we're building that base. And it's not terribly exciting, but as we keep touching on, it's absolutely critical. to allow, that FTP increase, allow that VO2 increase, allow all of it to happen. So don't worry about it. Not important right now.
So I did want to throw this out though. One of the things that we should bring up is when you're talking about doing these longer rides. From my perspective, what I've seen in most of the scientific literature is in order to actually get the most bang for your buck when it comes to building aerobic base, you need to be in that zone 2 for at least an hour and a half. Now that doesn't mean that if you get on the bike and do 45 minutes of zone 2, it doesn't have a benefit. It's just the greatest benefit.
Sure.
When we start talking about being on a bike for an hour and a half, something like that, now we start getting into the realm of fueling. And I think that's kind of one of the things that most people don't think about. And so, there is a time and place for fasted rides, and there's also a time and place for fueled rides. What do you think of those concepts?
Well, I like to do fasted rides under 2 hours, 3 times a week, just to really kick the really kick the system in to actually start utilizing fat as fuel. I think from my perspective, I think something beyond 2 hours. You should make a fueled ride, but in typical fashion, most people, and I'm kind of basing this a lot on, time. Most normal people, other than highly pampered cycling coaches, have 9-to-5 jobs and families and mortgages and silly things like that. Where a 3-hour ride on a Tuesday is not a possible thing. So the assumption here is that, during the week, getting that hour and a half, 2 hours is probably pushing the envelope, with the concept of, the weekend, you've got a little bit more time so you can actually get those longer rides. So, typically fasted rides during the week and, a fueled ride on the weekend.
No, I think it's, am I froze?
You are froze.
I am froze again. I don't know if it's, what's going on there.
Chilly winter on the East Coast.
I guess so. I'm going to drop off, see if I can.
And Chuck has left the building.
Here.
I really hope he comes back. But in the meantime, I think if you've got some questions about this, specifically, I think this is one of those opportunities to send in your questions. But typically, that's kind of how I set up most of my riders' schedules based on a work week.
Can you hear me, Brian?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, so you can hear me. You just can't see me, and I'm not quite sure the technical side of the house why I lost myself. But I guess you'll just have to listen to me talk for a few minutes. We've got about 2 minutes left. So as long as you can hear me, I guess we'll be okay.
Yep. So far, so good.
All right. So what's your closing thoughts on aerobic base? So we talk about, you mentioned that doing a couple of rides during the week, up to about an hour and a half, something like that. And then a longer ride on the weekend, preferably fueled, and then adding some gym sessions during the week.
Yep. Yeah. So typically, depending on the situation, and a lot of these things are very general concepts. But 2 to 4 days in the gym, 4 to 5, typically 5, well, maybe even 6, depending on, again, general terms, days on the bike with 1 to 2 longer rides, and, the rest being somewhere in that ballpark of striving for that 1.5 hours to optimize that zone 2. that's pretty typical for this time of year.
All right. Well, Brian, I think that we've hit our 30 minutes, and I'm not here, but I am here. So we'll drop off now. Just so everybody knows, we're going to take about a 2-week break because of the holidays, and I won't be in an area in which I have internet, and apparently I'm still not there. But if anybody's got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us. Our emails are in the description below. And when we come back, we're going to talk about recovery.
Very good.
Any thoughts, Brian?
No, on recovery. Yeah, I'm a big fan of recovery for clearly obvious reasons. It's one of the best parts of the cycle, actually.
All right. Well, we'll have a great discussion about that, and happy holidays. Thanks for joining me this evening. Sorry about my video. We'll have to sort that out. But
happy holidays, everyone. Yep, absolutely.
And we will chat with you all in about 2 weeks.
Y'all take care.